she ended up dancing. It wouldn't have been so bad if he hadn't been so conspicuous, but he was 6'3" with a face like a horse and round glasses with lenses so thick that his eyes filled them like moons, and he had a limp. Even though most of the photographs showed him wearing his barrister's wig, he was still horribly recognisable. Some boys had shouted something at him as he'd walked to the station that morning. Not knowing how to react, he'd waved and grinned. Afterwards, he wondered whether they might have been saying something insulting or obscene. The Dryden case, the cause of it all, was already being called the scandal of 1929, and they weren't yet halfway through January. It was a grubby little tale. A year earlier, Hannah Dryden, rich and glamorous, had divorced her husband, Maurice Dryden, the popular novelist, on the grounds of adultery and desertion. Maurice's next book, Mistress of Mayfair, charted the adventures of Helena, an opium-smoking sex tigress in London, Paris, Rome, New York and Marrakesh. When he spoke to the papers about the book, Maurice dropped heavy hints that Helena's exploits were based closely on those of his ex-wife Hannah, who sued for defamation and engaged Skelton to represent her in court. The usual defence in such cases might have been to point out the dissimilarities between the fictional Helena and the real Hannah, age, appearance, background and so on. But instead of doing that, Maurice Dryden chose the more difficult but far more vindictive course of claiming that Helena was indeed Hannah, and the book a true-to-life account of Hannah's supposed debaucheries. The trial was an Aldwych farce. Maurice's key witnesses were a grubby private detective who claimed to have kept tabs on Hannah over the course of several weeks, a cashiered colonel in a bad wig, and Alejandro Zabala, a self-proclaimed Argentinian fencing champion. Worst of all was a French chambermaid who squeaked, simpered and zoutalorsed her way through elaborate accounts of Hannah's exploits while flirting outrageously with the judge. All of them had been carefully primed and rehearsed by Maurice Dryden. They told terrific stories. The Herald and the Mail published every suffering detail. Women's Weekly put Hannah on its front cover and nearly doubled its circulation. The directors of the Tempo Lux Watch Company of Luton made a fortune by producing a cheap copy of the rectangular wristwatch that Hannah had allegedly left behind at the Hotel Negresco in Nice. Skelton led the prosecution and found the main obstacle he had to overcome was naivety. Although he was a 36-year-old married man with 2 children, the witness statements frequently alluded to sexual practices of which he was entirely ignorant. His Latin, fellow, lingua, and so on, led him to make some educated guesses, but French, never his strong subject at school, led him to translate Maîtresse de la Douleur as Our Lady of the Sorrows, a misapprehension that was thankfully cleared up before the trial began. Edgar, his clerk, a man much better versed in the ways of the world than he was, helped where he could, although neither of them ever learned the exact use of the haunted mitten, nor why the delivery of 8 baskets of fresh peaches to a hotel room might be taken as evidence of lewdness. To help, Edgar tracked down at a specialist bookshop off the Charing Cross Road a small but useful library on the subject of sexual deviancy. Mary Stopes's married love told Skelton that the bodily union of a man and woman is the solid nucleus of an immense fabric of interwoven strands reaching to the uttermost ends of the earth, some lighter than the filmiest cobweb or than the softest waves of music, iridescent with the colours not only of the visible rainbow but of all the invisible glories of the wavelengths of the soul. But it made no mention of the strap-on. The works of Havelock Ellis brought revelations about inversion and autoeroticism, while Krafft Ebing was good on necrophilia, masochism and satyriasis. A less academic approach to the subject came from Émile Roussel's Daphne, or the 7 Temples of Rapture, which had been bundled into the bag